Somalia, Fartumo Kusow is a high school English teacher, novelist, podcaster, activist, and mother of five who lives in Windsor, Ontario. Fartumo first appeared on this podcast in 2020, chatting about her second novel, which was her debut novel in English, Tale of a Boon's Wife. She's here with us today to discuss her new novel, Winter of My Spring, published by Spark Press in March 2026. Welcome back, Fartumo.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, your new novel, Winter of My Spring, has gone through a somewhat non-traditional pathway to publication. You won a contest called STEP. She Writes Press Towards Equality in Publishing, and that has resulted in the publication of your new book through She Writes Press and Spark Press. Can you share a bit about your experience, how you got involved in this contest, and what the process has been like for you?
In publishing, like everything else, is quite challenging and has been. And the book had a traditional publisher that picked it right before COVID. But then when COVID came, they felt that the book was too heavy for the situation or the environment the readers were in. So then I decided that I was going to see if I can have other publishers pick up the book with everything that I wanted to have in intact. And then a friend of mine published with She Writes Press, and one day she just emailed me and she said, "Hey, they're running this contest where they will pick two books written by marginalized authors, women marginalized authors. So maybe you want to submit your manuscript there." They do that usually in sometime in March. And then I submitted it, and then I didn't even remember it, but I received this email from September saying that your book had won, and that's where we started the process of getting the book ready for publication.
That's amazing. Congratulations. And as you mentioned, the book does discuss some very difficult subject matter, but very topical. The abduction of three girls by a group of extremists, their captivity during which they're forced to become child brides, and the challenges they face within their own community when they manage to escape and return home. What specifically inspired you to take on this topic with your novel?
This book really came long time ago, 2014. I don't know if you remember it, but there were Chibok schoolgirls in Nigeria that were kidnapped by group of radicals called the Boko Haram. It was about 200 girls. They were in a school where they were in a dorm and they were taken. And then we had this hashtag that come up called Bring Back Our Girls. And the hashtag was supported by everybody from Michelle Obama to Angelina Jolie to Malala Yousafzai and everybody. And it was continuously bring our girls back. And we would get ideas of what happened, how many girls were able to be coming back, and so on. But one thing I found was missing from that dialogue was the voices of the victims, the girls themselves. So I tried to imagine, because that kind of using girls and women as a part of weapon of war happens across the globe. It's not just in Nigeria, it happens in Somalia, it happens everywhere where there is conflict. So I thought, if these girls could speak for themselves, what would they say? And who is essentially responsible for the harm that was done to them? Because it was so easy to just look at the kidnappers. Not that I'm saying they're not guilty, but to look at them and put all the blame on them. So I tried to imagine who else and what else was responsible by girls facing that. And if they could speak for themselves, what would they say?
How much research went into the process of writing this novel? You must have had to dive deep into some really difficult topics.
Yeah, there was I actually started the thesis of the book I wrote down late 2014. We're already 9 years, almost 9 years later. And it's been a long time. So it not only the research, but writing some of the scenes and some of the topics were quite challenging to absorb and to write. So I had to read a lot of girls and women as a part of women of war happens across the globe. It's not just in Nigeria, it happens in Somalia, it happens everywhere where there is conflict. So I thought if these girls could speak for themselves, what would they say? And who is essentially responsible for the harm that was done to them? Because it was so easy to just look at the kidnappers. Not that I'm saying they're not guilty, but to look at them and put all the blame on them. So I tried to imagine who else and what else was responsible by girls facing that. And if they could speak for themselves, what would they say?
How much research went into the process of writing this novel? You must have had to dive deep into some really difficult topics.
Yeah, there was I actually started the thesis of the book I wrote down late 2014. We're already 9 years, almost 9 years later. And it's been a long time. So it not only the research, but writing some of the scenes and some of the topics were quite challenging to absorb and to write. So I had to read a lot of documentaries, a lot of personal accounts. I went home in 2019 and spoke to some people back home, and so it was a lot of research and a lot of contemplation of what to include and what to write about without the book going to the other end and becoming a sensational story.
Yeah, the way you've balanced that is truly remarkable. So, Radha, Micah, and Sarah, the three Somali girls at the center of this novel, are such vibrant, unforgettable characters. How did these characters first come to you? What can you share about the process of shaping and developing them?
So usually when I write, I know where the story ends, where I wanted to get to at the end. And where I wanted to get at the end of this book was to to bring to bear and to acknowledge the power women have if they can run their own lives. And it's the idea that the weapon to wound and heal a woman is in another woman's hand. So that's what I wanted to get there, to show that. And these were girls that I could imagine that are innocent enough that they still have this childhood wish and vibrancy, and also old enough to speak about the harm that's done to them. So I had to come up with those, create these girls that can be, sassy to their mothers and not listen to what they're told and not to follow the orders their mother said, you can't do this, you can't speak like this, and say, Mom, you don't know what you're talking about. But then at the same time, when they ended up in this troubled environment, that they could appreciate. And also girls that are young enough to be innocent, also old enough to understand what is right and what is wrong and what is appropriate and what's not, to have enough, just enough knowledge about the religion, about the culture, about the background, about the use of language, relationships, that they could look at things and say, this doesn't look right to me. I didn't want to choose girls that were like 6 or 7, where they don't really have that much appreciation. And I didn't want to choose girls that were 17 or 18 or 19, where they usually are not part of that process, where even radicals would get those. Those are the type of girls that they're looking for.
Interesting. And you mentioned, that these girls do have this innocence and hope to them, and there are hopeful notes in within the challenging subject matter. What do you hope that readers will take away from the experience of reading Winter of My Spring?
If readers can take one thing, it will be to see that things are not as this way or that as we like to imagine. So things have really layers on them, and know one person or one character is this way or that way. So there is reasons why people behave that way. So that would be my first one. And also another one that I want a reader to take is whenever we look at religion text, it doesn't matter what religion text is, even if we imagine that text is pure and perfect, then people who practice in that religion are flawed human beings. So the two are not really, we can appreciate the religion text while still understanding the people who practice it are flawed. So and also the hope and the power of one person to uplift another, one woman to uplift another, that we can't really wait another hero that's going to come. There is a hero all within us, and we could uplift others within even that most difficult situation.
Writing about this was obviously a challenge. What kind of self-care practices helped you through the process of writing these traumatic stories and the violence and resilience and determination in them?
I usually don't outline when I write. I know where the story is going and I just write. And my first draft is usually 90% of the time garbage. But whenever I get to an end, if you're not the writer, this might come like crazy, but I let the characters speak to me as I write. So when all the major scenes, especially the violent scenes and betrayals scenes against the girls, those are almost always were written on a weekend mornings, either Saturday or Sunday when I had a good night rest. So if I was writing at night and I get to that scene where I'm feeling the weight of it, I would usually stop and or skip ahead and get back to that scene and do it either a Saturday morning, Sunday morning when I could take my time and take a break from it. And that's how I basically dealt with in writing. Usually in my general writing, I make myself write 1 hour a day. It doesn't matter what time of the day it is. I write 1 hour. And sometimes I come to the computer and sit there for an hour and won't be able to write anything. And sometimes I can write a chapter in that hour. So I make myself, but this particular book, those scenes, I would skip ahead and write it on a weekend or a long weekend or when I had time off from work so I can take, because I could feel it, the weight of it.
That sounds like a very reasonable strategy. Thank you for sharing that. So, Fartumo, the last time we spoke with you on this podcast, several years ago, we talked about a powerful quote attributed to you: "Writing is my social activism." And of course, since we last interviewed you, you have experienced a very difficult personal tragedy. Your daughter's life was cut short by gender-based violence. Since then, you've become widely known as an activist who advocates for the eradication of intimate personal violence, and you're doing amazing work. You've been speaking out about this issue all over, from the Windsor-Essex region to the Ontario legislature and beyond. So I'm wondering, how do you balance the demands of this activism as well as your teaching, your elder care, and other responsibilities with finding time and energy and space for your writing?
In a joking sense, I would say I don't have any other life except working and writing. But I think writing is, for me, when the world outside my screen or my document makes no sense, the writing is where I make the world make sense to me, the world that I can create, and kind of like if I had the power to will the world around me outside my screen to follow some kind of pattern, that's where I am finding a way to make sense of the world, is to write and create these scenes and these characters that can follow, if not predictable, a pattern that I can appreciate and see. So it's almost my escape from the world outside that sometimes can be very challenging and unpredictable.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful discipline that you have. So is that escape, or is your writing bringing any new projects to the forefront?
Yes, so I have another one that's YA novel that's I'm shopping around for called Irrational Numbers that examines the conflict between parents who come here as an immigrant and their children who are born here and the challenge those children face as they maintain a one world within the home and one world outside the home. So that's the one that just went out last week for submissions. Hopefully it will find a home. And I'm working another one that's called Moon Blood. That's fantasy that looks at if women could rule the world, what would the world look like?
We'd love to invite you to read some of your work for us. What have you brought to share with our audience?
So I am going to start with the first two lines of chapter one, and then I will read parts of chapter two. The reason I am chapter three, I should say, the reason I'm going to start with the first two lines of chapter one is to show the innocence of the two girls as we get to the beginning of the novel. At 13, I saw no enemy. I knew no fear. From the small town of Marca, where my family of five lived, the ancient port city in the southern region of Shabelle, the world lay before me on the other side of the Indian Ocean, visible from our kitchen rooftop. Several hours passed. Inside the truck, a foul smelling air pulsed. It was as if I had my nose pressed against man's armpit, inhaling the cigarette tar caked over his unwashed skin. I exhaled to purge the unclean air from my throat, afraid I might throw up. But the attempt only pushed more of the sickening odor into my lungs. The faint light of the receding day streamed through a small window between the driver's cabin and the back of the vehicle as we drove and drove. My sight adjusted to the dim light. The man who held the rope that tied my wrists together was asleep. The other man, also snoring, gripped the rope that bound Micah and Sarah tightly together, their mouths hanging open, their expressions blank. They stared toward the back of the truck. We had been driving for a while when it began to rain. At first, the raindrop pattered on the metal roof. Soon the sound of the engine merged with the water, reminding me of the drum beats we played after the Hussein twins went missing, like that slow and agonizing rhythm. The thunder boomed in my ears. My heart heaved with each rat-a-tat-a-tat, rat-a-tat-a-tat. My mother's voice echoed in my mind. Oh, Rara, if only you would listen, she had told me there was trouble everywhere. I didn't believe her when I should have. I saw her words as hysterical, exaggerated account of what could happen. In this truck driving further and further from home, I yearned to hear my mother complain, tell me what to do, spell out every step of every one of my steps. I was ready to give up the world and all that was in it to hear her loud and unrelenting voice one more time. My thighs twitched, sending a tingling sensation to my feet. I sat up and stretched. Cold uncertainty crept through me, and I shifted my weight, awakening the man who clutched the rope tied to my wrist. I jerked my hands away from him, and he groaned and pulled me back. He twisted the knot even harder and took with it another layer of skin. He continued to stare at me, as if mocking me for my inability to get away. I wanted to gouge his eyes out, to dig into the orbit around them until the dark ball and thick slime of his sight fell onto my palm. A tiny smile crept around his mouth, like he'd read my mind and was daring me to act.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Fartumo. The new novel, Winter of My Spring, is available in March 2026, published by Spark Press. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.